Hello, everybody, as you join us. I am Gavin Geis. I'm the Executive Director for Cause Nebraska. Been in this role for 13 years now. I'm based in Lincoln, and I'm joined with another member of the Common Cause team, or the Common Cause Nebraska team, by Cheech Saria. He's our state organizer, and he'll be helping field the chat, keeping track of your questions as we go. I am also joined tonight by Amy Keith. She is the Common Cause Florida Executive Director. We joke that Common Cause Nebraska and Florida, or Nebraska and Florida, are more similar politically than one would first expect. They're not similar states geographically, but politically, very similar. Amy has been with Common Cause for 3 years now, and she is based in St. Petersburg, Florida. Common Cause Florida is the election protection coalition lead out there. And just last year, they sued on state redistricting. They lead on many of the issues that other Common Cause states do, but they are out front on those for sure. Also joined tonight by Julia Vaughn. She is the Common Cause Indiana Executive Director. She has been with the organization for 31 years. One of our longest serving, most veteran state staff members. She's been at it, longer than us by far. She's based in Indianapolis. Common Cause Indiana leads on redistricting, voting rights, lobbying, and ethics reform. She also wanted to share that she's a typical Hoosier who loves basketball and is sad that Nebraska joined the Big Ten. So feel free to leave any of your feelings about that as well in the comments. We'll deal with that in turn, but I know she's not alone in those feelings. That's all right. No. And then finally, we're joined by Marlisa Marin. She is the program director in Common Cause Texas. She's been with the organization going on 4 years now. She's based in Kyle, which is right outside of Austin. Still a big place, but not quite Austin. Common Cause Texas leads on elections, voting rights, campaign finance, and we're all right now working on redistricting, so I'll just throw that in there because I know they're working on it and that it matters. So that is our awesome cast tonight. I want to say thank you to all of them for joining for this. It's an idea we wanted to try. One benefit of just being part of the Common Cause team is knowing there are awesome people across the country working on many of the same things we are. And so it's a privilege to get to hear from them, hear what they're working on, and maybe learn something as we address similar subjects here in Nebraska. So tonight, quick agenda. I'll give a quick overview, lay of the land, talk a little bit about Nebraska, not too much. But then really we want to hear from the 3 state offices that are joining us, what they've been seeing, and where their fight's going, and we'll leave plenty of room for Q&A. So to start us off, give a little bit of broad context about what's going on. What are we talking about? What is redistricting? Very quickly. And then Nebraska. So I know most people joining the call tonight, you already know what redistricting is probably, but unlike things like voting, the majority of people still don't necessarily know what redistricting is. Polling has shown that in Nebraska, that it is something people are still waking up to. So quickly, redistricting is the process for drawing voting maps to account for population changes. That's the concept. It's a process that we do every 10 years, in the years ending in 1. In Nebraska, it's a process done by the state legislature, and it's something we do in years ending in 1 because the census has immediately preceded that, and we have updated data on where people are living, where populations are shifting, where communities are growing, where they're shrinking. So that's something we do every 10 years just to account for those population changes. It is a process that can do 2 things. It's a process that can ensure every vote counts, or it's a process that can be manipulated to control our elections. It can be used for noble reasons, to ensure that every voter has a say in our elections, to ensure that communities are kept together, and that they can vote in blocks to affect who represents them. Or it can be used by partisans to ensure they control elections and put the thumb on the scale to get the outcome they want in our elections. Last thing I'll say here is right now there's a nationwide discussion on redrawing these voting districts that was kicked off because of pressure from the Trump administration on a variety of election officials and a variety of legislatures across the nation. Nebraska has not been the main target, but we have unfortunately not avoided the glare of the administration and their interest. So Nebraska, state and federal legislators in Nebraska have talked about this mid-decade redistricting process, but they have not acted yet. You've probably seen it in the news over the past month and a half of either sitting members of Congress or state legislators talking about this as a possibility, but yet no one has yet to act. We are waiting and we are ever vigilant for action, but nothing so far. Last week, 13 state senators met with the Trump administration, and it was reported initially that some of that was going to be about redistricting, but coming out of that meeting, they all claimed it was not addressed, that the national press on the situation had pushed it off the agenda, and it was never brought up. Now, we weren't in the room. We don't know what was actually discussed, but that is what is being said out loud. And coming out of that meeting, there was some skepticism from state legislators about the viability of actually pulling it off. The Speaker of the legislature, Senator Arch, has said he is not in favor of calling a special legislative session on the matter. He doesn't want to call any special legislative sessions here towards the end of the year. And other typically moderate legislators have said no, they don't want to change the rules of the game. They don't think it's fair. They don't think it's good. So they're currently not the votes to pull it off in the legislature, at least publicly. We know these conversations are going on behind the scenes. So likely we will not see a special session unless something drastically changes. It could be introduced during next year's legislative session if that conversation is still happening nationally. But again, that would be a very difficult effort in Nebraska. There's not a lot of time next year. It's just a 60-day legislative session. We have tens, if hundreds of millions of budget shortfall at this point that we're going to have to address. And Nebraska statute requires a 5-month gap between an election and when maps are formalized, which means that there would not be time unless they vote to override state statute. They did do that in the past during the 2020 pandemic season when the legislature voted to override for an emergency reason, but that's not the same. So all of that to say, unlikely, but not impossible, right? Things could happen. People could flip. Thumbs could be put on scales and people push to do things. But right now, things are looking in our favor when it comes to not diving into this. But as we'll hear, states are really wishy-washy, flippy-floppy right now on this, and we don't know who's going to do what today or tomorrow. So that is the quick lay of the land and what's going on in Nebraska. I want to switch over to our panelists so we can hear more about what they're up to and just get some news from the nation. Let's hop over to Amy in Florida.
Thank you, Gavin. And it sounds to me like actually redistricting might be one place where Florida and Nebraska actually differ a little bit, although we also do have budget shortfalls and a 60-day legislative session. So what's happening with this in Florida? So I'm going to do a quick timeline lay of the land and then actually talk about some of the unique context of Florida when it comes to this issue. So first up, as Gavin mentioned, basically since June, we've seen, pressure on Republican leaders across the country to redraw their districts, specifically for, to increase Republican seats when it comes to the midterm elections. Starting in around July, we've seen in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis started pushing to redraw Florida's congressional map in advance of the 2026 midterm elections. So that was starting around July. And then in September, what we saw was, in August, the Florida House Speaker, Daniel Perez, did announce that there would be a Congressional Redistricting Select Committee during the 2026 legislative session. And earlier this month, members have actually been appointed to that committee. Now, the way the timeline looks in Florida, well, it's worth mentioning there. That's the Florida House. The Florida Senate has not acted on this at all quite yet. So we've got the governor pushing, we've got the House that's appointed a committee. We've had no action from the Florida Senate. We will, there was initially some, discussion. I think the governor may have even mentioned the idea of a special session, but it does look like if this discussion happens in Florida, it'll happen during the regular session. But our interim committee weeks, which are a time when legislators meet in advance of session to talk about bills and to work out issues. So that actually starts on October 6th. And that is the type of time frame when we imagine we could start to see some movement on this. But the meeting of that Congressional Redistricting Select Committee in the House has not been set. So we don't actually know if or when this discussion will begin in Florida. However, politically speaking in Florida, there is a supermajority. And if that supermajority decides that they want to move forward with this, they will move forward with it. Our legislative session does begin on January 13th. And as I mentioned, it's 60 days. So they do have time to do it during the regular session if that is how they so choose. Now, one of the complications here in Florida, which is really different from a lot of other states, is that the Florida Constitution explicitly prohibits partisan gerrymandering. I'll talk more about that on the next slide, but that is one factor that needs to be taken account in Florida. Another factor, which Gavin mentioned briefly when he was doing my introduction, is we've actually had a bunch of lawsuits which stemmed out of the 2021-2022 redistricting that happened a few years back, following those court rulings. Now, both of those cases were actually about racial discrimination and racial gerrymandering. Common Cause and our partners, we sued in federal court that the maps, the congressional maps that came out of that 2022 redistricting were discriminating against, they were basically discriminating against Black voters under the 14th Amendment. And then there was a state case which was saying that it was illegally violating the amendments to our Constitution, which prohibit the voices of minority voters, the voting power of minority voters being diminished. And they really did focus on Black voters in northern Florida, both of those cases. Now, what's interesting in both of those cases is that there wasn't really much debate about the fact that discrimination occurred, that the governor was looking at race, and that there wasn't much doubt that there was a voice of Black voters that was diminished. However, in both the federal and state cases, regardless, the maps were upheld. In 2022, Ron DeSantis really strong-armed the map he wanted. It was unprecedented for a governor of Florida to draw a map. So he strong-armed that map through the legislators. So the maps we have now are the maps that the governor of Florida drew and the majority Republican legislator in Florida approved. So those are the maps that are rumored to be redrawn, which is a little bit wild in and of itself. You get exactly the map you want, and then you look to redraw it. But all right, so let's talk a little bit more about specifics on this in Florida. So one thing, Floridians do not support partisan gerrymandering, and that's not a conjecture. We know this. So Florida has a very long history of gerrymandering. Both ruling parties in the legislature, first Democrats, then Republicans, have a history of drawing maps to favor their party. We also have a long history of, elected leaders cracking and packing Black communities to reduce the electoral influence of Black voters. And that is why the people of Florida sought to end gerrymandering in our space, in our state, both partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering, when we passed the Fair Districts Amendments in 2010. Now, the Fair Districts Amendments were two citizen-led amendments to the Florida Constitution, and they passed with 63% of the vote in 2010. Organizations like Common Cause and our allies, we worked for years to get these amendments on the ballot. Hundreds of thousands of Floridians signed petitions to get these amendments on the ballot. And again, when they got to the ballot, they passed with a supermajority vote. So we had 63% pass them into law. Now there's two amendments. One bans this gerrymandering in federal redistricting, the other in state level. But both of the amendments are, they basically have the same standards. One, and the number one standard in both of those amendments is that no district shall be drawn with the intent to favor or disfavor a political party or an incumbent. Floridians knew exactly what they were voting on, and that standard is held equal with a prohibition on racial gerrymandering, and it is above standards such as compactness and geographical boundaries. So Floridians not only banned partisan gerrymandering, they made it one of their top tier standards that cannot, that has to be, the maps have to be held to. So key takeaway here, the Fair District Amendments made partisan gerrymandering illegal in Florida. Um, it's may not be, partisan gerrymandering is not illegal under federal law, and it might not be illegal under other states, but it is absolutely illegal in the state of Florida. Now, we also know that Floridians still don't support partisan gerrymandering any more than we did 15 years ago. Common Cause recently commissioned a poll, and I will drop a link to the poll in the chat if folks are interested. But that poll, which was just conducted in the past month, did show that 66% of Floridians, this month support Congress banning partisan gerrymandering nationally. And that is 58% of Republicans, including 59% of 2024 Trump voters. It is 69% of independent voters in our state and 74% of Democrats. So there's an enormous amount of opposition to partisan gerrymandering that continues and has been consistent over 15 years. And I think that is because Floridians know exactly what happens when there is more extreme gerrymandering, right? What happens is that we get less representation. Our elected representatives are less accountable to the people they serve. And we end up with things in our state like our current insurance crisis, right? Because we just have elected officials who aren't paying attention. All right, so we know that Floridians are absolutely opposed to partisan gerrymandering. And what Floridians really want is they really want community interests to be taken into account in drawing maps, not which party's going to really win the political fight. The other thing that we know that Floridians do not support is mid-decade redistricting. So we don't support any of this initiative, either partisan gerrymandering or mid-decade redistricting. Our poll that we conducted recently shows that even Republicans in Florida don't support mid-decade redistricting. 55% of Floridians overall oppose this, and that includes a plurality of Republicans at 45% and 46% of Donald Trump voters from 2024. In fact, we found that only 36%, a minority of Republican voters, supported this effort. Now, really notably for Florida, 60% of independent or no party affiliation voters in Florida also oppose mid-decade redistricting, and only 14% of them support. Now, that's super important in Florida because about a third of our electorate is not affiliated with either major political party. So it's really important that our non-affiliated voters in this state absolutely do not support mid-decade redistricting. So what Floridians are saying is, in the poll, it was indicated that if Florida's elected officials can't listen to our people, Congress should step in and pass, a bill to stop mid-decade redistricting. We were also really pleased to see that Floridians do believe that an independent commission is the best way for Florida to draw district maps, with 76% supporting. And we know that voters also believe that drawing maps fairly is super important to the health of our country and our state, and that one party really should not be drawing the maps on their own. I also think it's really interesting that we do see, that independent redistricting supported again by voters of all party, including voters who voted for Donald Trump in 2024, despite that it is, a lot of this rhetoric about mid-decade redistricting is coming from the president. So in short, Floridians do not want this. We didn't want it 15 years ago. We haven't wanted it for decades. We've been through gerrymandering for decades. We don't want it. And we really don't want our legislator to waste their time and our taxpayer dollars again. Budget shortfalls, we don't want that. Just to make our maps even more gerrymandered than they already are. Floridians are really facing enormous issues that impact our lives, like the cost of groceries, housing, and our insurance crisis. That's what we want our legislator to be spending their time on during our very short 60-day legislative session. Thank you, Gavin. I'm happy to take questions now or later. You let me know.
No, thank you, Amy. Let's keep moving, but we'll save time for questions and then pop back over because I'm sure people have them. No, they're just always very interesting. Next we're gonna head over to Indiana. So I'll pass it over to Julia and she can tell us what's going on in Indiana.
Okay, well, thanks, Gavin. Really pleased to be able to be part of this conversation this evening. So, here in Indiana, unfortunately, we don't have any constitutional language that prohibits partisan gerrymandering, and it's been going on here for a while. Both Republicans and Democrats have practiced it in the past, although for the past two cycles, Republicans have controlled everything. So, certainly our current maps favor them. Here are our current congressional districts. As I said, there's been a Republican trifecta controlling both chambers of the legislature and our governor's office since 2011. So there's very little that the Democrats here in Indiana can do to stop this. Unlike Texas legislators, they can't flee the state to prevent a quorum because Republicans have a quorum without the Democrats showing up. So we are really at the mercy of our leadership. So the current congressional map is 7 Republican, 2 Democrat seats, and the 2 Democrat seats are where you would suspect them to be up in the northwest corner of the state, which is essentially 3 counties that are very much suburban Chicago. And then the little purple place in the middle of the state, that's Indianapolis. We are represented by a Black Muslim, actually. One of the most liberal members of the House of Representatives represents Indianapolis, Indiana, which surprises a lot of people. But for decades, it's been recognized that these two areas of the state are Democratic areas. The local governments have been controlled by Democrats for a while. So there was always sort of this gentleman's agreement that while Republicans certainly gerrymandered the heck out of state legislative maps, that the congressional maps, they would respect that voters in Northwest Indiana and in the middle of the state in Indianapolis, which is by far the biggest city in the state, more than twice as large as the second largest community, also the most diverse part of our state, that those were naturally Democratic districts and they really wouldn't try to gerrymander them. So there was the gentleman's agreement until 2025 when the Trump administration said they want at least one more seat out of Indiana. And this has been going on really since about August the 7th. Vice President J.D. Trump made a visit to Indiana, huddled with our governor and the legislative leadership. They were very tight-lipped after that meeting. Then a couple of weeks later, about 80 of the 120 Republicans in the General Assembly took a trip to Washington, D.C., got feted by the White House, had a grand old time, and got some in-person arm twisting from Vance again about redistricting. And the leadership met with Trump. He made his appeal to them firsthand, but they're still holding out. They've made no decision yet. And this is really, they're between a rock and a hard place because this is not really a very Hoosier thing to do. Mid-cycle redistricting, it is clearly against the rules. And Hoosiers, and particularly Republicans in Indiana, they tend to be rule followers, not rule breakers. So this is not something that they would be naturally inclined to do. Now, while we certainly have some MAGA conservatives inside the state legislature, the leadership is really not that. They're very much still establishment conservatives, the country club, the Chamber of Commerce type Republican. So again, this type of activity just isn't well suited to their personalities. As I've described it, our leadership doesn't wake up in the morning thinking, how can I get on CNN today? In fact, I think they think just the opposite. These are not people who court controversy not really something they're naturally inclined to do. Then there's the fiscal cost of a special session. Like Florida, we've got all kinds of problems that are internal here to Indiana. We've got healthcare costs that are among the highest in the country. Utility costs have been rising rapidly. So there are just so many other issues. This was a budget writing year here in Indiana, and important programs that serve, seniors, veterans, children's, those got cut. And so it's very hard for the legislature to justify the cost of a special session. Another reason I think they're very hesitant is that this could backfire politically, particularly if they get greedy. You know, there was some talk in 2021 that they would go after the first congressional district. Republicans would try to flip it. That's the district near Chicago. And they took their shot, and still the Democrat won with 53% of the vote. If they start messing around with Marion County, we have a ton of Democrats here in this county in Indianapolis. So they got to go somewhere. They can't erase them from the map. They've got to go in adjacent districts. So in a heavy turnout year with an unpopular incumbent, this could really backfire and put some of the Republican incumbents around Indianapolis in much less safe districts. All of the congressional Republicans have endorsed mid-cycle redistricting, but only did so after they were threatened with primary opponents. So they're going along with it, but I think many of them are holding their breath and saying, oh man, this might not turn out too well for me. So here in Indiana, if this decision could be made in a vacuum, if it was just up to our legislative leaders, just up to our governor, I don't think that they would likely redraw maps. But of course, it's not just up to us. Getting intense pressure from the Trump administration. And just yesterday, the governor did a radio interview up in Fort Wayne where he said, well, if we don't go along with what the administration wants, then there could be consequences. So, the big consequence for Indiana is that we need federal approval for a Medicaid waiver. And so, really, low income Hoosiers who are in desperate need of health care coverage are being held hostage by this attempt at a partisan power grab mid cycle. So, unfortunately, if the carrots don't work to convince our legislature, then we know, and in fact, the governor said yesterday that he will get out the sticks. There will be consequences. So if this happens, and it's looking increasingly like it is going to happen, it will probably be in November sometime. You guys talking about 60-day sessions really make me jealous because next year our short non-budget writing session is 30 days. And they start filing to run for Congress the first week of January. So leaving it until next year is probably not an option. They will probably come back in early November or on Legislative Organization Day, which is typically the week of Thanksgiving. They will come back and ram it through possibly in one day. So what we've been doing here is just, good old grassroots pressure. Last week, we and some of our allies in the All In for Democracy coalition delivered almost 10,000 petition signatures to the governor and legislative leadership. We and our allies have generated thousands of calls and emails to those same people, and we've had a handful of Republican legislators stand up and say, no, we shouldn't do this. We've had former Governor Mitch Daniels say, no, this would be wrong. But again, there's all that pressure coming from out of state. We've also had a dark money organization, robocalling and texting into Republican districts trying to convince their constituents to support mid-cycle redistricting. So every petition drop we do, every press release we send out, it seems it's matched by the other side sending the opposite message. But public opinion polling here is strongly opposed, just like in Florida and every other state. Hoosiers don't approve of partisan power grabs. They understand that mid-cycle redistricting is changing the rules of the game, and they don't like it. We're currently working to lift up the voices of local elected Republicans who are speaking out against this, giving them a sign-on letter that we will publish early next week. There have been multiple rallies, both here in Indianapolis and in places around the state against this, so we're being very loud and very visible. But unfortunately, the pressure from out of state might win. I did want to end on a positive note because we are having success at the local level organizing around independent redistricting commissions. And in fact, next month in Valparaiso, we will have an ordinance introduced to create a citizens redistricting commission for city council districts in the city of Valparaiso. When that happens, they will be the fourth local government in Indiana to pass a citizens redistricting commission for local redistricting, which will happen here in 2032. We are also working in Michigan City, West Lafayette, and Lafayette, Indiana on similar reforms. So while everything is a mess at the national level in terms of redistricting, we will probably see a special session to do mid-cycle redistricting. Local redistricting reform is catching on here in Indiana, and it's a great thing to work on because we're getting support from both Republicans and Democrats at the local level. So thanks so much for being here this evening and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you for ending on a positive note. That's always nice, especially amidst this conversation. We will turn now over to Marliza for some updates from Texas, the state you've probably heard the most about in the news on this subject. But yeah, work goes on. Over to you. Put
Hi,
a
y'all.
placeholder slide in here for you.
So sorry that I did not come prepared with a PowerPoint presentation like the two very well prepared, well spoken folks before me. I just wanted to provide a quick update on Texas. As Gavin mentioned, I'm sure y'all have heard that we've had a lot going on in the great state of Texas. So in July, there were rumblings from folks in the federal government sending basically a letter to Greg Abbott stating that the current congressional maps, which were drawn in 2021 after the most recent census, that they were actually racially gerrymandered, which is wild because in 2021, when the maps were drawn, folks took them to court because they stated that the maps were racially gerrymandered. So since for years now, the current congressional maps have been challenged in court, and to this day, we actually still don't know what the court has decided regarding that challenge in court. So when Pam Bondi sent a letter to Greg Abbott in early July stating that the congressional maps were racially gerrymandered, imagine our surprise that after years of fighting in court, stating that the maps were not racially gerrymandered, they actually decided to call a special session and redraw the congressional maps that they've been arguing for years were actually not racially gerrymandered. So if you're confused, that's fair. They have begun to they redrew the maps basically. So the special session started July 21st. And as y'all know by now, probably, and was mentioned before by Julia, Democrats broke quorum, fled to several other states in order to fight back against this sham redistricting process. As y'all are also probably aware, they were not successful in their efforts to stay out of the state long enough, waiting out the fight, basically. So they eventually came back. The maps passed. They passed the House on August 20th and the Senate on August 22nd. And by August 29th, they were signed into law by Greg Abbott. During this entire legislative process, I think it's important to point out that Texans showed up. Texans got on buses, for hours and hours for just the opportunity to even speak out about this redistricting process. Many times public testimony was limited during these legislative hearings, and most folks were well aware that there was a huge chance that they weren't going to be able to provide their testimony in person. And yet folks got on buses, they showed up in hundreds. So every single hearing that we had, there was actually over 300 folks that were registered against it, and less than 20, if I'm remembering correctly, that were registered for it. So it is very, very overwhelmingly clear that Texans are also not in favor of these redistricting processes. Despite our organizing and our efforts to stop the process, like I mentioned, the maps have passed both the House and the Senate and were signed into law by Greg Abbott. There is a lot of confusion right now. So Texas has an election in November. These maps will not be in place for the November election, but there are folks that are questioning, right, whether or not they are still in the same district, and rightfully so. So there's a lot of education right now going into letting folks know that the congressional maps will not be put in place until after the November election. And right now our focus is on taking it to the courts and fighting it there. It's also important to note that we're actually getting a decision on the original redistricting court case soon. So we'll know if the current maps are racially gerrymandered, and we'll likely also hop straight into the fight to ask the courts basically whether or not the proposed maps are also racially gerrymandered. So that's a little bit about what we got going on in Texas. Happy to, answer any questions that you'll have. And again, sorry, I did not have a PowerPoint.
Do not apologize. We just wanted you here to give updates. PowerPoints are great. They're not the end all be all. No, we'll just take you. But thank you. Thank you again, all three of you, for just these. Yeah, I love hearing what's going on in your states and the work you're doing. Let's open it up now for Q&A. If folks have questions, please drop them in the chat. If you got questions, if you don't have questions, I have questions. But that's, I would sooner take other people's questions first. Let's see. Here's a good one from Linda. Has any public official promoting redistricting now offered any nonpartisan reason for redistricting? I'm going to give that to that feels like relevant to everyone. So whoever wants to take it first, go for it.
I just want to, because this is actually also, I thought was really interesting listening to Marlisa talk, because I think we're seeing some similar stuff in Florida. As I mentioned, we had maps that said, we had sued the existing maps to say that they were racially gerrymandered or racially discriminatory. And we're seeing kind of almost the potential that race will be used as basically what I would call like a cruel fig leaf, almost a reverse thing, saying that these maps are illegal under the 14th Amendment, or they're racially problematic because they preserve the rights of minority voters to vote, right? Because they give Black and Latino voters in Florida the opportunity, the chance to elect a representative of their choice, because they preserve electoral power of Black and Latino voters. And there is some rhetoric out there which seems to be implying that that is like racial gerrymandering, which is wild, right? This is, rather than, ensuring that we are protecting the voice of everybody, they're going to use this possibly as, again, like I said, a cruel fig leaf for what is in fact, pretty clearly across the national stage, a partisan endeavor. I'm not sure, like definitely want to hear what Marlisa thinks about it, but I do see that there's some rhetoric like that in Florida, that might get used as an excuse to do this, and we shouldn't fall for it.
Yeah, definitely echoing what Amy brought up. I'd say that during legislative session, or during the special session rather, um, a lot of what the Republicans were presenting as their reason for doing this was simply because they can. So unlike Florida, Texas actually does allow partisan gerrymandering. And so that was pretty much the reason folks were giving. It was actually a pretty kind of wild thing to witness in person, was folks being asked questions about the maps and asked, did you take this into consideration when the maps were drawn? Was this taken into consideration? Was this taken into consideration? And most of the times folks were just answering like, we hired a law firm and the law firm took care of it. We have no idea what was taken into consideration, which is wild to admit, that you, an elected official, have no idea the legislation that you're presenting to be signed into law that is going to affect every single Texan. But we have seen, unfortunately, a lot of misinformation surrounding what these new congressional maps would do in terms of voting power. So we have seen a lot of legislators speak out, saying that this actually increases representation for communities of color, which is, we know, isn't just not the case, and it's just flat out misinformation.
Here in Indiana, very early on, there was some chatter that they should do this because in Northwest Indiana, we've had such an influx of Chicagoans disgusted with Illinois coming across the border to live in, low tax Indiana. Which is, sure, there's a little bit of migration, but certainly not enough to impact a congressional district and the, equity of the districts to others. So they've kind of given up that farce, particularly since they also have their sights set on Marion County. So no, this is just pretty much acknowledged for what it is, a partisan power grab. Republicans will talk about, well, back in 2011, the Democrats, well, yeah, that was 2011. That's the last time Democrats had any ability to gerrymander in Indiana. So they're very much living in the past. And, the message is the Trump agenda. We have to help the Trump agenda, and this is what we can do in Indiana. So, that they want us to play part of this national game.
No, thank you all. Different answers everywhere, which is awesome to hear.
We've got another question.
Oh yeah, I was for Nebraska. They haven't had to justify it yet, so they haven't gotten to that stage of needing to justify it for any reason other than we're talking about it. So that's Cheech. What do you got for us question wise?
Walt is asking what will happen in your state if the Supreme Court eliminates race being used.
I'm not super sure I am grasping the question. I think what you're asking is, if the maps are proven to be racially gerrymandered, what would happen? Um, and I believe the maps would have to be redrawn. Um, but as of right now, so because the old maps are the ones we're going to be getting, the old and present maps are the ones we're going to be getting a court decision on. And there has already been a new set of congressional maps were passed. To be completely honest with you, I have no idea what would happen, and I don't know that there is a whole lot of precedent to lean back on in that regards, because I don't know that this has happened, but I could be wrong. Maybe other experts here have a better answer for you.
Just real quick, I'm wondering also if Walta is asking, what if they say that it wasn't race? If they say we can show that it wasn't, or right, there's enough data to say it wasn't race, what then?
I'd say that the data clearly shows, right, that these are very racially motivated maps. Folks are being packed and cracked into districts. Um, Voter power for specifically Latinos and Black folks in Texas are going to be disproportionately affected. Um, a Latino voter is going to have, for every of the power of 1/3 of a white voter, and for Blacks it's going to be 1/5. So it's incredible to that, you know, it's even up in the air because we know what the data shows. But if in that case, then I would say we would have to keep fighting as the people, to push back on this power grab. That's really what it is. It's an immense power grab, and it's happening across all of our states.
We've got a couple more questions. First one from Kristen. How do you respond to people who say the only way to fight back is to do the same thing in blue states, like they're discussing in California?
Anyone anxious to jump on that one? Haven't had to
I can
respond to it
take
yet.
it. Common Cause does not support gerrymandering in any way, shape, or form. We believe that all states should have independent redistricting commissions. So, yeah, we don't support. Yeah, we don't support gerrymandering. Done. Full stop.
Well, and I think, it's the old, if you fight fire with fire, everything burns down. And that's our concern, is that if this becomes normalized, then, we will be kept in constant chaos because the party in power will decide to switch the lines up every time it suits their purpose. So it really does just put democracy on incredibly unstable footing. And our argument here has been, again, don't listen to out-of-staters. This is what, you need to do for Indiana. Just stay out of this fight. But, obviously that's not a compelling argument when you have a president with a big stick that he can use. So.
I do also want to just highlight that Common Cause also, that I think that there's legislation we've supported in the past for Congress to make a move to actually have independent redistricting for all federal elections. I think there's something to be said for the idea that there should be the same method that these maps are drawn in states across the country, and that the people of each of those states should be the ones that are really drawing these maps. So that's what it comes down to, right? Is like we should be looking consistently across the country with an independent eye.
Agreed. No, I've got, so jump into another one in the chat. So once this is brought to legislators, are there any other strategies like breaking quorum? So not breaking quorum necessarily. What are your other strategies that would be effective in not getting this passed?
Well, in Indiana, as I said during my presentation, there aren't enough Democrats to stop a quorum. We have certainly thought about, we know particularly in the Senate, that there is a lot of division on this. So if they call a special session, we will certainly try to get Republicans to, walk out with Democrats, but that would be a really radical step. And the people who have stood up against this aren't really radical kinds of people, so I'm not sure that would be successful. Really our only defense here is a lawsuit. And, it all depends on what the end maps are. Again, opening up the whole racial gerrymandering Pandora's box, depending on how they split Marion County up, you could possibly make a claim there. And then we have some folks talking about bringing an equal protection claim under our state constitution, but that's completely uncharted waters. So not great options, but again, they're talking about wiping out Democratic representation in our state completely. So we definitely have to, explore every option available to us because we're not 100% Republican state.
In Florida, we also can't do a quorum thing, supermajority. I would say that, we partners, organizations and individuals in Florida have, sued multiple times to enforce the Fair Districts Amendment. And I have no doubt they would again. There have been lawsuits after 2010 and after 2020. That would be important. I also think that one really important thing to remember here, at least fine. So in Florida, and actually all states, it is the state legislature that draws the map, right? That's drawing the map in Florida. And they're drawing the map for Congress, right? But what I like to remind Floridians is that they're not, at this point, they're talking about redrawing the congressional map, not redrawing the state map. So your same representative who did this power grab, who actually drew this partisan map, you get to vote for that person in November, right? You get to actually vote for that person again. They are still your representative. And so they can shimmy the lines around, but you can still look at your state rep and you're like, why did you decide to disempower my voice in the US Congress? And it's just also remembering that this is a weird tiered system, right? With, that's what they're drawing. So yeah, it might, so in addition to, legal action, in addition to the advocacy that happens, to try to make people realize that this is not what the people of their state want, people of the state have, in fact, a way to hold their leaders accountable as well.
Texas, Florida, Indiana, if this thing goes forward, how many Democratic House seats will likely be lost in your state?
They are going after the two that we've got. So whether they will succeed, as I said, it could backfire spectacularly, but we have two that they think are up for grabs.
Yeah, similarly in Texas, we actually think because the districts were packed and cracked so interestingly, there is actually also an opportunity for it to backfire on them and for it to backfire pretty badly. The way they redrew the maps, it seems that they are aiming to flip 5 seats. Potentially 6, but um like Julia mentioned, because things are gerrymandered so badly, there is a huge risk that this could backfire on them, which is why it's so important to organize and make sure that you're getting all of your friends and family to go vote. But I'll pass it over to Amy in case she has anything to add.
Yeah, actually similar. So first of all, in Florida, we don't know yet because this hasn't moved, right? We literally have a committee formed in one house. Okay. So there's no maps yet, there's no seats yet. It is kind of anyone's guess, but kind of like Texas, Florida, again, the map we have now is the map that Ron DeSantis drew. So it's already a pretty gerrymandered map. So there is also the issue that if they try to start messing around with that, you do run into the problem that they're weakening other districts that were safely Republican. So this could in fact backfire. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens in Florida on that.
No, this is a good question. I think it also underscores why maybe it's not likely in Nebraska because as we all know, we don't really have a Democratic seat right now. We have a seat that sometimes goes blue, but it's all red at the moment. So what are they hoping to gain, or what could they gain? As everybody else has already noted, it just shifts people around and means a different district gets packed with blue voters that didn't have it before. So that's another reason why it's, I think, very unappealing for Nebraska. There's just not a lot to gain. We've only got 3.
I want to make a note. It's kind of an interesting little, because there was a SCOTUS thing, if race cannot be considered, right? there's that second part of that question. I just want to note that, like, so in a case in 2017, the Supreme Court ruled in Common Cause v. Russo, and we didn't like most of that ruling, right? Because it said that there's no federal prohibition on partisan gerrymandering. It did, in fact, uphold the right of the states to prohibit partisan gerrymandering, which means that is what, and I mean, for Florida, that is what we did, right? So we prohibited it at the state level, and the Supreme Court of the United States, they said that's fine. So they don't, they already said that, and we already said it's illegal. I mean, so from our standpoint, I don't know what SCOTUS has to say about that.
No? Okay. We're at our time. I want to ask you all one last quick question, and that is, what's the next redistricting headline we should all expect from your state? What are we all going to see in Nebraska as the next news that gets to us from where you're at?
Floridians rally to show their opposition to mid-decade redistricting, if it happens. But hopefully the headline is, Florida doesn't do mid-decade redistricting.
I think for Texas, it'll definitely be social justice groups, pro-democracy groups sue Texas over recently passed congressional maps.
Well, I guess my wishful thinking is Indiana lawmakers grow a spine, say no to Trump, but probably it will be Governor Braun calling special session for redistricting. So we'll see. They will be met with a lot of resistance, though, I promise you that.
No, thank you all. Cheech, are there any lingering questions out there that we missed?
We've got one more. It is from Cynthia. How do we keep the focus on the powers in the Constitution and not on the big stick threats that keep being lifted up over us?
We'll end on the easiest one, I guess.
Yeah, real easy.
Well, I guess I would say it's, short-term versus long-term damage. Certainly the Trump administration has the ability to make things very difficult for those states that do defy their wishes. But again, if we normalize this, then that's long-term damage to our country, to the Constitution, and, just to democracy. So I guess that's the way I look at it.
Other insights here?
I liked Julia's answer.
That's all right. We can all co-opt Julia's answer, have her give the last words of wisdom.
It was a great answer.
It was.
It's the truth. That's the truth. There we go.
All right. We're over time. Thank you all. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you so much for taking an hour to have this conversation. I know it was helpful to me, and I'm sure to everybody who joined us. You can follow all these great organizations on all the social media. Are you guys mostly on Facebook now? Facebook, Instagram, X? You can find us out there. They're all out there saying things. So if you want to stay tuned in, please go look for them. And thanks everybody for joining us. That's our hour.